Great Monday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing well, King. Always good to see you on a Monday morning.
Absolutely. I completely concur. So, as we normally like to get started, I should say, how about you go ahead and get started with your gratitude moment? What are you grateful for this morning?
Yeah, so specifically and generally, I'm grateful for indoor plumbing, and I really mean that seriously, and for my refrigerator with food in it. Um, More immediately, I'm grateful this morning to have a roof over my head. It's been pouring for about 24 hours, and it's really wet outside, and I'm dry. And then the last one I'll say is I'm just grateful for extended family. I went to a wedding on Friday. One of my closest cousins, first cousins, whom I grew up with, his daughter got married, and I got to see some folks who lived, a few miles from me growing up, that are now spread out around South Carolina, North Carolina, Delaware, New York. And it's just good. The youngest is in their early 60s, the oldest is in their late 70s, and they all have kids and grandkids. And it's just, we can just pick up like that because we know and love and trust each other. So I'm grateful for family. Since my nuclear family, my parents and my sister, the last of them passed in 2009. So for me, family is when I can be with them, it's good.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I'm great to hear that you had a great weekend and got a chance to see some family. I would say I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. Another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. Again, I'm grateful for a mother who's still alive, who still has sound mind, who still has love, energy that I can connect with and receive. And I'm just grateful for the challenges in my life. I tell you, each challenge that comes into my life, I'm grateful for that because I know there's a growth pattern at the end of that once I solve that issue. So I look forward to those learning experiences now is how I look at each challenge that comes into my life in that context. And finally, I'm grateful for the opportunity to host this show with you and continue our exploration of what it means to be fully human.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen.
Well, with that being said, what's your spiritual energy number?
Yeah, I'm 10. Again, I always joke a little bit about, you're having giving me the language and the perspective of it's a choice, not an observation. This morning it was kind of cold here and as I said, wet. So getting out of bed this morning, I had to make the choice because the observation wasn't, it didn't feel like 10, but choosing it is pretty straightforward. So I'm there with you as a 10, and I'm happy to have that kind of energy.
Now you said it's cold there. What's the
Well,
weather there?
relatively speaking, it's probably just about 50 degrees, low
Mm.
50s. And so, as we move into autumnal weather, it's wet and damp and cold, cool outside compared to the summer weather. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, my spiritual energy number echoes yours. I'm a 10 as well. Like I said, to your point, it's a choice. And I realize for folks who might be questioning whether or not if you choose a 10 every single day, is there room for growth? And my answer to that question is absolutely, because each day is independent. So it's not as though each day builds on the next day. Each day is its own separate challenges, obstacles, triumphs, wins, victories. And so choosing a 10 means that you're setting your day with the intent of living a 10. And if you don't feel it, then you got to ask yourself the questions of why don't I feel like a 10? What can I do to get to a 10? And that begins to put that process in place. And that's what I suggest to other people instead of choosing a lesser number. Again, it's up to each person's choice. But as the engineer in me, I don't see a value in choosing a lesser number. It's not like you get an award or someone comes along and say, you're more realistic than this person here because you chose a 7. It's just that choosing a 10 sets your parameters, I should say, to be, I'm going to excel and make this a great day regardless. So that's really where the logic comes from. So thank you for sharing that with me, Reggie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And as we begin to move into our show, why don't you lay out what our topic is today?
Yeah, so we've been speaking about healing America's narratives. That's a book title. Subtitle is The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. And over the course of the last 9 or 10 episodes, we've gone through each of the 9 traits of shadow. I'll just say them really quickly: ignorance, arrogance, fear, bigotry, violence, greed, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness. And based on our private conversations and something you sent to me, we found that there was it's worthwhile going back to a couple of those for even a deeper dive. And today we're going to take a closer look at excess. And because the question, arises, is excess always a problem? And just some of the language that you shared in our private exchanges was, if you have excess passion, whether it's political or religious or financial or media based or patriotic, if you have excess ego or beliefs or ideas, is excess always bad? So we don't know where we're gonna go with that, all of that, but that's where we're gonna go today, taking a deeper dive into excess. Um, I'll just begin by saying one thing that occurred to me immediately, looking at what I just said with regard to is excess, your question, is excess always a bad thing? Um, is that it really does depend. And the example that came up for me is, I think that some of the examples of excess, and I'm going to put an asterisk next to this as I say it, because I'm going to qualify it myself. So I look back at, one of my heroes has been John Lewis, the late Congressman John Lewis. And he had, I don't know if you would call it excessive beliefs in love and equality, the idea of a more perfect union. But he was willing to put his body and life on the line, as did Dr. King and others, for a belief. Really, and I don't mean to minimize it by saying it was a belief, because I believe the same things. And so, compared to the average person, what folks like John Lewis and others did can seem excessive. He have to get beaten, get his head cracked open coming over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. He just went back for more. He didn't stop. He just kept going. So the question becomes, is that excessive, or is that what needed to be done in that moment in history for that human being? So I think the can of worms that you opened around the word excess it's really interesting, because I don't have definitive answers. If it works and does good things, is it really excessive? And that's the question that came up for me when I looked at, again, John Lewis was my primary example for that. One other example, I think I had an example of excess as a high school kid. I wanted to be able to dunk a basketball. So for about 4 years, high school and college, I used to do jump squats with a barbell across my shoulders. It was padded with a towel, but still, it was, in hindsight, it was pretty stupid. Because I wanted to increase my vertical leap, and I did by about 7 inches, my standing vertical leap. Now that was excessive compared to most kids at the time that I knew. And this was before Nautilus and Universal machines, and which made that type of stuff safer. So I did increase my vertical leap. I never dunked, but I could touch the rim. And in 2003, I had to have both my hips replaced because I had destroyed the cartilage. So in hindsight, that was excessive. It didn't feel excessive to the 16, 17, 18-year-old who was doing it. So I just want to put, that ridiculous example out there, which is very personal for me. And then the more, I guess, sublime example of John Lewis and folks like him, who were willing to subject themselves to difficult situations over and over again, as two examples of excess. So I'll just hit that ball over the net to you and see what happens.
Well, I definitely appreciate you choosing that topic. What's interesting, as you was talking, I was thinking to myself about excess, particularly as it relates to passion, because I look at what John Lewis was doing. He was passionate about it.
Yeah.
And maybe to a certain extent, you're passionate about, increasing your vertical. And that's where I believe passion can fuel a lot of this excess that we're talking about. I know that in my own life, I've been very passionate about helping out what I was perceived earlier in my life as my people, being Black people specifically. And as I got older, I realized that my people were really folks who I'm aligned with, not necessarily folks who I have things in common with, such as skin color and ancestry. So, with that being said, that being passionate can lead you down a dangerous road, because I believe passion can lead to excess in the context of how you go about investing your time. Your perspective is definitely colored by the passion itself. That's why I look at my life now, and being a man who's now 54 years old and never really having a family, never choosing to have a family, having girlfriends along the way, but never really allowing myself to settle down, because I believe that looking at a lot of my people who I looked up to, who were great men, who I modeled myself after, they weren't great fathers, you know, particularly from their children's perspectives. They were great men to the world. So, like, once you choose the the path of being a leader and the person who's going to fight for it, justice, then you automatically kind of saying to the world that you belong to the world at that point, not just your, as you say, your nuclear family. And that decision, of course, has consequences. As we talked before, every decision we make has consequences that we have to deal with. And so, with that being said, my passion of creating learning content, raising capital, working to create a community, investment opportunities, to right a wrong that I saw with regards to injustice that had been done in the housing market. All those things led to me being very passionate, very singular focused. And now I see I was in excess now in hindsight. And that's why I really believe, as we talk about this, just to point this out, I know this is what you do for a profession, but this is where I really see the importance of and the necessity of having a coach when you're dealing with excess. Because if you don't have anyone to help you navigate that passion is fueling you, then it just burns, and your natural inclination, if you really accept that, is to just stay committed to it, stay focused to it, and just execute with all the time that you have. You sleep, you dream about it. You wake up, it's the first thing you think about. It dominates your thoughts. So if you don't have someone to kind of help you navigate those waters, it can easily lead to problems. And that's why I see that folks who become um, patriotic, there's still passion there, but they're passionate about their patriotism. And so that can lead to down, as you know, you talk about in your book, with folks now becoming even more um, inclined to justify the need for violence, because that's where I believe that excess gets there is if someone gets in your way of what you feel to be the right way, or what you feel to be the direction you're headed in, and you feel that something is an obstacle, your goal is to move through that obstacle, knock it down, go through it as as you can, and that can lead to the problems.
Yeah, I mean that's you know this is why this excess question and especially the passion piece of it is, I think, such an important conversation, because probably, and I'm going to just, I don't know if this is true, anecdotally it feels true, um, but almost anything that humankind has created, uh, any invention, um, ideas that manifested into actual artifacts, into real things, was created by or manifested by passionate people, whether it was one individual or a group of people. They had a passion for whatever it was, including the founding fathers. They had a certain passion for this, experiment we call America now, and it wasn't perfect and it had all kinds of flaws in it, but they were passionate about it, and it's a real, I believe, subjective um, I can't think of any way to navigate it that's not very subjective. Because what you just shared, um, I always go back immediately to development. So if I have political passion, but my passion is limited by my worldview. So if I only care about myself, right, or if I only care about my party or just my state or my local congressional district, if I don't really care beyond that, I can be very passionate, and my passion will be limited and could then hurt others who aren't part of my specific group. If I care, just to keep it in the United States for a second, if I care about the country, and when I say the country, I mean all of the people in it, not just the people who look, sound, or vote like me, but all of the people in it, um, the infrastructure of it, the the culture, the beliefs of it. If I really care about all of that, which is a much more complex type of caring, because there's so many moving parts to it, I'm less likely to do damage to that infrastructure, to the culture, or to individual people with my passion. So again, I have this. I always say this. I have this developmental bias. If it's about me, I can do a lot of damage. If it's about just my group or my groups, I can do less damage, but still a lot. Now I have a group behind me. But if I care about all the human beings, whether it's in the U.S. or ideally globally, I'll be much more thoughtful while still having the same passion. But I have more things to take into consideration now. And if my concern is beyond all human beings, to all that is creation, the universe, call it whatever you want to call it, then it becomes increasingly more difficult for me to take action that's going to do some harm. And if it's inevitable that harm is going to be done, and sometimes in real life that happens, um, my process will probably invite me, allow me, force me to limit the harm to the greatest extent possible. In other words, the least amount of harm would be done. So again, passion can be an excess of passion. I think is going to be a function of, among other things, developmental worldview. Because if my passion is just about myself, and I want to do things for me, and I want the credit and the profits and the whatever, um, I'm probably going to do some damage or more damage along the way. Because I think of artists and musicians and people who have just dedicated their lives from the time they were very young to an art form. We know the famous ones who have made a lot of money with music or singing or whatever. But there are millions of artists who aren't famous or rich who have passion, and not just artists. There are craftsmen, there are carpenters, there are a variety of people. So I'm not answering any questions here, I know, but I just keep on coming back to that developmental piece because it's very, very real, and we hear it every day. If we listen to politicians and performance news celebrities, you can hear their worldviews really clearly, and they're mostly stuck in it's about us, our group, whether they're liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican. They're group centric, and very few of them speak as though the country matters, in my hearing of them. So their passion, I think, does more harm than good.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I wanted to share a quote with you all that I used to read every single day by Alexander Hamilton. And this was a quote that when I allow myself to be led by ego, unknowingly, led by ego, this is a quote that I felt that really aligned with my thought process and fueled my motivations for the day. The quote is, in this case or in another occasion, I will counter directly without deterring any obstacle that stands in my way. And I often thought about how Alexander Hamilton, this is before, the musical came out and he got celebrated in that context. But when I had read about him earlier in my life and his life, I thought to be fascinating, and pretty much the things he had to go through and his philosophy as related to slavery back during that time was someone I actually admired and I kind of wish had been more incorporated into American history.
Mm-hmm.
That quote to me was any deter, any obstacle that stands in my way. And see, that's a great thing if you're doing something positive.
Yep.
Now if what you're doing is, as you say, in a group dynamic where it's just for us at the price, at the expense of others, then that's a dangerous mindset to have. And that's what I see quite a bit in our society today as I call forced tribalization, that the society, media, and the systems that govern our lives has forced us into these tribes to say, based on your skin color, based on your gender, based on your sexual orientation, based on your religion, your political view, your ethnicity, you're in this tribe. And then as a part of this tribe, the world needs to see you in that context first and foremost. And that to me is, I think, the most um, dangerous part of how our society is really shifting is that we are becoming more tolerant as a society of each other, but then at the same time, we're becoming more into these tribes. That if you're down in my camp, I mean, just think about it. Everyone knows this now, it's pretty much accepted. But you and I are old enough to remember a time when you can actually discuss politics without it turning violent.
Yep.
You could be a Democrat and you could be a Republican, and you both can have opposing views about different things, different ideologies, and that was fine. You could still have a cup of coffee. You still could have break bread. Some people could even be married and have opposing views. Now it's family members that I know that folks that don't even talk to
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
Cousins, because they have different political views. One may be a Republican, another may be a Democrat. So that's why I'm always encouraging that we got to really understand the systems that govern our lives, and is it in our best interest to just play along? Like when you see a particular candidate, as you talked about, political candidate that's giving his particular platform, listen for what he's selling, listen for his agenda, you know, and is it something that's really in line with what you believe, or is it just something that benefits the group dynamic if you fall in line with that?
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of critical thinking we need nowadays. And that to me is what really makes me much more, I would say, focused and passionate about becoming more fully human. So I'm passionate about that now because I look at the counter to that as something that could get me caught up in one of these tribes. And I know that from experience, from my own experience and from what I've seen historically, if you allow yourself to get caught up in those tribes, it never ends well for you down the road. It's just going to destroy families. It may you may lose business. It may also cause health issues now as a result from anxiety and all the other things you're dealing with as a result of doubling down. Like you and I've talked many occasions about Donald Trump, and I really look at Donald Trump, in my own opinion, without any factual. I mean, I haven't done any true research, I should say, to back this up, but just from my observation, I would say he's arguably the most powerful man in the world. Because anytime you can do the things he does and not face consequences from that, and still have a loyal following. I mean, no one, I've never seen any other political person have that loyal following to the point where we're going to nominate him or we're going to vote for him regardless of what he does. That to me, I've never seen before. Everyone else had to kind of watch what they say, be careful about certain things. Donald Trump doesn't have to do that. He can truly be the image that he's creating for his people. As long as he's that image, his people are there. So anyway, my point I'm going with this is that even with that power, even with that ability that he has, I still never see him happy.
Hmm.
He's never somebody that you see smiling, just enjoying himself. Even when he's playing golf, he still doesn't have a smile on his face. That's a competitive thing he's doing. He wants to dominate and win. It's like if that's your dominating thought all the time and everything you should do, it's like truly that proverbial or scripture talks about selling your soul for the devil in that context,
Hmm.
that to me is literally what he's showing the world. That's what happens. Getting what you really want, but this is the consequences. This is the trade-off of the, getting those things that you're striving for, that you're passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, I find I agree with you in terms of his power. Um, I agree reluctantly. I wish it weren't the case, but I watch, what he can get away with. Um, I harp on the 14th Amendment, like equal protection of the laws. And the 14th Amendment doesn't protect me the same way it protects him because I can't afford the battery of attorneys if I were to
Mm.
go out and do things as he does. Um, but it also it brings me to this point too. In order for him to be powerful in that way, he needs tens of millions of people who are willing to, and I'm not even sure how to complete this sentence. There are certain facts. There are certain things that are arguable and debatable, but there are certain facts, things he has said and done, which has said and done them publicly, which are true and real, and they're not debatable. Right? They're there. I mean, the most egregious one is probably January 6th, where he had previously invited everybody to um, to Washington D.C., all his followers. He had been predicting that the only way they could lose the election. He'd been saying that out loud since August of 2020. So he had been setting the stage for this. The only way we can lose is if it's rigged, if they steal it. And then on that day, he spoke to thousands of people and said, "We're going to march to the Capitol. We're going to stop the steal. We're going to, Mike Pence is going to do this, this, and this." So he incited a riot, and it's January 6th committee, and it seems so far it hasn't seemed to matter. There haven't been consequences. You couldn't get away with that. I couldn't get away with that. In other words, if we had incited a riot, people went and killed some police officers, another one of the protesters was killed inside and damaged the Capitol of the United States. I'm not going to get away with doing that. So he has the power because there are tens of millions of people who are willing to give him that power. They could take it away like that if they wanted to. Without those followers, he doesn't have anything. He has,
Right.
whatever assets he has.
Right.
So he needs the people who are willing to be followers of whatever it is they think he is leading them towards, or what he represents to them. But he represents the guy who pushes back against the man. I don't know, against the machine. He described himself as an outsider, but for me, he's just another rich white guy. That's what he's always been.
Right.
So I agree, as you said, that he's powerful in that regard, because things that would normally get any one of us thrown in jail or shut us down don't seem to have that impact on him. And the last thing I'll say is, in my experience of the criminal justice system in this country, the legal system in this country, it has many flaws. It works way better for the wealthy than it does for the poor, but it works slowly in many cases. And I like to believe that the prosecutors, um, in order to build a case they can win, have to build it slowly and carefully, in order to prosecute somebody who has committed the crimes that he's accused of committing. So maybe he's not getting away with it. Maybe it's just taking longer than I would prefer for him to be held accountable. But I don't know. But I agree with you that he has some real power, and and I'm not putting an equal sign between Trump and this next name I'm going to say, but it's another example of a powerful person in history, which was Hitler. I mean, he did horrible things, and he was extraordinarily powerful in convincing a group of people that he was right and that they should follow him and do what they did um, in the time leading up to and during World War II. So there's not a, we're coming, going full circle. Excess is in the eyes of the beholder, and it depends on whose excess it is and what they're doing with it. Um, so it's a real kind of nebulous place to be. For me, it goes back to the conversation between loyalty and integrity. Years ago, and they still do this. There was a poll among CEOs nationwide to ask them what traits they wanted most in their team, their direct reports. So the C-suite executives, and number one was loyalty, and integrity. Got like 3% of the votes, something like that. So like loyalty was the number one. I don't know what the other ones were, but integrity was nowhere to be seen. I forget how many traits they measured. And the thing about loyalty is you can be loyal to anything. You can be loyal to Hitler. You can be loyal to Gandhi. A little bit of a difference there. But integrity, in terms of it meaning, wholeness or completeness, that's very different. If integrity is important, I want somebody who's fully human to be my direct report, who's working towards being full part of the human race. That's very different from a blind loyalty. So part of that is, I think, what we're navigating with this idea of excess again, because if you have excess, but it's doing positive things in the world, it sounds like, well, cool. but if you have excess that's hurting a lot of people, then we want to push back again. And the way it's used in the book, examples in the book, the one that comes immediately to mind, and there are many of them now, is that we dropped more bombs on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia than we did in Europe in World War II. So we dropped more bomb on those little countries, which was a war of aggression. We were trying to put democracy in Southeast Asia through bombs and napalm and bullets. We used more than were dropped in World War II. That's excessive. That's crazy. And what good came of that? None, except some of the veterans, the American, combat veterans, and some of the Vietnamese combat veterans from the North have gotten together and realized that they had more in common with each other than they did with their respective governments. So there was that kind of brotherhood that they recognized. And that's not every veteran who did that. But that's excessive. Slavery is excessive. Betraying every treaty with Native Americans is excessive behavior over several centuries. So that's the use of the word in the book. But what we're delving into here is a little bit more slippery in terms of it's in the eyes of the beholder. I like John Lewis's excessive belief and passion for and he said, all the work I'm doing about nonviolence and equality, it all comes down to one thing: love. He goes, the civil rights movement is about love more than anything else. And that was his view of it. I'm all for that kind of passion and excess.
Yeah, excess that benefits others, excess that's connected to the energy of love is the excess that we prefer. Unfortunately, like I said, you really have to be someone who is operating off your own plan, not to get caught up in the circus, so to speak, that we live in now, the media telling us what's important. It's like you're taught to work a 9-to-5 job your entire life that most people don't really enjoy and don't feel really appreciated. And so you got to deal with the energy around that, then anxiety around that. And then to escape that, you have to go to other vices like either alcohol and that could become excessive, or food, and that can become excessive. And then to deal with that excess, now you got medical issues, medical problems. And so to give you any kind of sanity around all this, then we got to become fanatics around sports. And you use the term fan, shorten it, but it's fanatic is
Yeah.
what you are, for a particular team. And what I realized that if you allow yourself to really be dominated by those folks and those systems that put that out there and you're navigating that, then you are going to be someone who's going to be unhappy, a lot of medical issues, and more likely very stressed if that's if that's how your life is lived by. In other words, if you're fueled by sports, regardless of what the sports are, if you're fueled by, well, I got to, you say things like, I have to have a drink, got to have a drink, or I have to go eat this particular food, looking for escapes. And that's because, again, you don't know how to properly create your plan, live your plan, align with your purpose. See, that's why one of the things, I know that's kind of slightly getting off topic a little bit, but my answer will always be why it's so important to align with your higher purpose in life. I want to make sure I put the higher purpose, higher meaning that is something that's going to be beneficial to others. Because again, you can have a purpose and say, my purpose is to, make $1 million, and I'm going to make it regardless. I don't care who gets hurt, uh, who I step on to get it. I'm going to make $1 million. And so just align to one purpose is not enough. It's the higher purpose that creates value. And that's where, to me, I'm obsessive about is creating value, creation. And I notice that in my everyday life with people, my everyday conversations, and I see how people live their lives, whether they're 9 to 5 workers or whether they work a business. And I listen to the things they complain about. And it's interesting how everyone wants someone else to behave differently than they're willing to do themselves. Like when you're a business owner, you want the customer to come in and be respectful, to be understanding, to pay a good, fair rate, which you consider to be, and be loyal, as you say before. But then if you are the customer, you expect the business owner to exhibit those same traits. And none that's ever really communicated, but you both expect that from one another. And you're looking for any semblance of being someone who doesn't get valued, someone who doesn't be treated fairly. You're looking for that, and then you're willing to walk away and go somewhere else, you know. And for me, that's where communication becomes so important because, if we see each other as human beings, you want to communicate to another human being if you feel that you're being not treated fairly. You feel confident enough and comfortable enough to say how you feel. And hopefully the person you're listening to is someone who's listening who's empathetic, who has emotional intelligence, who's willing to take into consideration what you're saying. Not necessarily change their mind, but at least consider what you're saying and listen to that and consider that, you know. And that's the direction I really want to go in because it now becomes even more scarier time because you talked about loyalty and integrity with those CEOs. And I believe any CEO, that's really a telling telling sign, I'm sorry, that when a CEO says, I'm choosing loyalty over integrity, that CEO right there has ethics issues. Because what you're saying is, I intend at some point, if necessary, to maybe commit some things that's somewhat shady, and I need to have my direct reports loyal to me so no one goes off and plays integrity card and turns me in and becomes a whistleblower or something like that. So that's why loyalty is more important. But to a person like yourself, you're saying I'd rather have people who are fully human. That shows you don't have the intention of doing something unethical or to cause harm in some form or fashion for your own selfish benefit. So that's really a telltale sign. It's like, you know, we as consumers, because we're all consumers. I hate the term consumer, but we all have to play that role. That's a role we play on a daily basis. If we're playing that role, I would think that it's in our best interest that if a CEO says that, that's a company we should start doing business with immediately. So CEOs won't even have the audacity to say it. They may still believe it, but you want to have the audacity to come out and make that statement. You at least tell me what I want to hear, which is I have value integrity above anything else. Like I've seen, there's different comedy shows like The Office, and this show called Superstore, which
Mhm.
talks about corporations and how greedy corporations, they make fun of them, and the corporations may have in their bylaws, we love and respect our employees, but everyone knows that's not the culture of that particular corporation. And but at least they have the intelligence, I should say, at least they're willing to play the role of I care about you. Whether or not I care about you is a different story, but I'm at least give you the verbiage and put in writing that I care about you from a legal context, and how you deal with it is another issue. So I want to sum up my point by saying this. I think that's a very important question, that loyalty versus integrity, to ask of anybody, whether they're a CEO or not. What's more important to you from a friendship standpoint? Would you rather have friends who are loyal to you or friends who have integrity and who are willing to hold you accountable to your actions?
Yeah, and that's as you were talking, and even as I was talking and hearing what I was saying, myself, I found that speaking about this conceptually or pointing at CEOs is pretty easy to do because I'm not a CEO. In some ways, I am. I'm CEO of my little my little office space here. I'm all of my direct reports, and I'm the boss. But more seriously, when you're pushed a little bit to have to balance that integrity and loyalty question in a real situation. So my experience with it was when I was a high school teacher and basketball coach, and even as a stepdad, as a parent. There were times when my basketball players or a student to whom I was always, I mean, it wasn't a democracy. Like my classroom and my basketball coach were not democracies. I was in charge, and if you show up in this classroom, this is how we do things. But I cared about the kids. And with my own kids, same thing was true. And when they were accused of something, I had a basketball player who was accused of stealing a car. My own kid was accused of trespass on a state university because he was skateboarding in the wrong place, and he actually had to go to court for that. And so, those are two, the stealing a car thing was more serious, but both of them involved the legal system. And so what I tried to balance, first of all, what if, my guy did steal the car, my basketball player? All right. And he has to be held accountable, but I'm also not willing to throw him under the bus. So there's a level of loyalty I have to him within the integrity of, if you did this, you're responsible. You have to be accountable for what you did. Same thing with my own guy, where, he was, my stepson's Dominican. He was skateboarding with two of his white friends, and a white police officer gave him the summons for trespassing and vandalism, but not them. And they were skateboarding together. So I had a real issue with that. So I said, you've got to deal with this, but I'll go with you. So I went to court with him. So my only point is that in our personal lives, it's not that we pick integrity over loyalty, but it's this, how do we kind of braid them together so that we have integrity while still being loyal to our own values and people we care about. So it's not that, which do you choose, this one or that one? So I always say, after I do this riff, and I've done this conversation on loyalty and integrity before, I basically say, well, my primary loyalty is to integrity. And it's kind of like a throwaway line in one regard, but I actually mean that, because I do have a loyalty to the integrity of what's true in the moment. And I also have loyalty to the human being it involves and to myself. And then I have to see how I can braid those together, for the greatest good, for what's most just and merciful, compassionate, and wise. So the more we dive into this, I believe the more complex our choices and our positions become, because we're taking into consideration more perspectives. Um, and so I just wanted to go there because it's really easy for someone to hear what you and I are saying, and we're kind of showing the weakness of loyalty and what we believe is the importance of integrity, which I do. You and I think agree on that. But in real life, moment to moment, um, in our personal lives with family, friends, and even coworkers, it's not always black and white, and it's more nuanced. And both loyalty and integrity come into play, in my experience.
No, I agree with you. There's a show I'm watching on HBO. It's called Evil Lives Here. It talks about folks who grew up or had spouses or children who ended up being serial killers. And that's the evil. And they're interviewing these individuals, and this many times, the first time the individuals talked about it, crimes maybe back in 1990, maybe as recent as 2000. But it's the first time on TV they're talking about their feelings about their particular spouse who actually, or son who committed these atrocities. But the show always talks about, there are signs. That's where I'm going with this. And so my point when you talk about loyalty, there are signs that somebody may be go off a deep end, maybe not to the extent of becoming a serial killer or something of that evil, but there are signs that a person may do. And I'm not saying in the case of your son that he was guilty of that, but let's say, for example, I remember when I was growing up as a young man, and a friend of mine had gone to the store, and the young man I was happening to be with, he decided to steal. We were serious. He decided to steal sunglasses, and I had no intention of stealing sunglasses. That was not even in my mind. But because he stole the sunglasses and had got away with it, and I wanted those sunglasses as well, because that's when they had the mirror shades that just came out. The mirror shades were like $25 a pair, and I had no way of buying that when I was 14 or 13-year-old kid. I decided to follow along with him under peer pressure a little bit and steal those glasses. Well, we got caught because we were greedy. We were excessive. We didn't just do it once. We decided because we got at the store, let's go back and steal more. So we were just going to keep stealing until we got caught. We were being excessive. And long story short, I got in trouble for it. I got disciplined. And he was my church friend as well. But where I'm going with this is that later on in life, now him and I lost contact with each other, but he committed another sign. For example, my brother had an older friend, and I took this friend of mine with me to my brother's friend's house, and we all hung out and did things together. And then after we all left, later on, my brother's friend called him and told him that he had caught that same guy I'm telling you about that was stealing from Sirius, trying to steal his tires off his car. He was out there literally jacking up his car, trying to steal his rims at that time. He was literally trying to steal that. Those are signs. And then later on in life, after I lost touch with this guy and all that, I come to find out that he got in an argument with his girlfriend, ended up shooting her sister, two other people. So long story short, he ended up getting the death penalty in Missouri. So where I'm going with this is, loyalty can be wrong, is what I'm saying. And sometimes you can be loyalty out of friendship, out of caring for somebody, but there are signs when integrity should come up more and be a better example to say, I should err. And I know I'm not judging anyone who doesn't do this, because that in that moment, you don't know. In that moment, you're going to feel that I have to protect this person I'm with, and this incident is isolated, and this is not who they are, and I need to protect this person because of whatever the reason that you feel that this person needs to be protected. But I'm just saying there's also, again, there's trade-offs and consequences to all the actions. And had this person been stopped earlier on and not had someone be more loyal to him and held him accountable for his actions, maybe he would not have done those crimes later on in life that he committed, or maybe he would have. We never know. But I'm just saying I think that's the human part of our lives that we have to navigate, because we don't know the outcome. It's not black and white. You can't say, well, if I'm always going to err on the side of integrity and hold people accountable, and you may destroy relationships. A person may have to go through some form of punishment that may not be necessarily just in the context of your son, that might not be equitable, equal, So those are things we have to consider. And that to me is where I believe the growth mindset, prayer, and just being more tapping into the energy, connected to the energy of love will win out more times than not. We're never going to have a perfect life. We're never going to always have justice on our side. We're not going to have things equitable and fair, but we all can make it to the point where there is still love there and connect to the energy of love.
Yeah, I mean, it all does, I believe. I agree with you. It comes back to almost every conversation we have when we circle all the way back around the resolution. I'll say resolution in quotation marks because sometimes resolutions are hard to find, but love has something to do with it. Coming back to some greater, you know, sense of a feeling of belonging, of caring, of letting go of fear, and being willing to step up on behalf of yourself or of other people. I think that does come back to love. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. But we reached a part of the show where, as we talk about on our show, the difference between our show and maybe other podcasts, it's not to just lay out a whole bunch of doom and gloom and talk about what's wrong with the world and what's right with the path we're advocating. It's to give people solutions so they can now understand how to navigate. And more importantly, I would say I'm going to ask this question: how do you recognize some of the signs of excess and then begin to right that ship so that make sure that you're not being too excessive in any particular area of your life?
Yeah, so I don't know that it's an exact science, but one of the things that I'm clear on from both personal experience and with dealing with clients, like the body knows when we're being excessive. Our body sends us signals, whether we're being excessive with our thought patterns, with our behaviors, with whatever it is. So when we feel some kind of discomfort, sometimes it's going to be stress, muscular tightness, sometimes it could be abdominal stress, sometimes it could be a heart palpitation, it could be a lot of different things. A question that is actually useful for doing shadow work as well, but it can point to excess, is to what extent is how I'm feeling, what I'm doing, what I'm saying, to what extent does it feel disproportionate? That's another way to say excessive. For what's actually going on. So if something happens in my life, and a lot of movies are based, a lot of popular movies are based on this. I mean, Mel Gibson movies, Liam Neeson movies, I think Wesley Snipe movies, and some others. Something bad happens. You kidnap my daughter, you do this, and then the whole movie is based on getting my daughter back and getting vengeance on the bad guys. Almost without exception, the vengeance of the good guy is excessive in those movies. In other words, he might get the daughter back, but he has to kill 35 people to do it.
Right.
So that's not a great example, but in our lives, it requires honesty with oneself. To what extent does my anger, enthusiasm, fear, anxiety, whatever it happens to be, to what extent does this feel disproportionate to what's actually going on? And if it does feel somewhat disproportionate, that's a sign of excess, and it might be time to two things: dial back whatever it is you're doing or thinking and how you're behaving, but also explore if there's some shadow element there, because disproportionate emotional responses are very often signs of shadow. It's something I'm projecting on to you, onto somebody else, but that's really inside of me. So note anything that feels disproportionate, explore it honestly, ask people that you trust because they have integrity, not because they're loyal, but ask people that you trust what they see and just explore it that way. because we're not, most of us aren't talking about the excess of dropping nuclear weapons or making terrorist attacks. We're talking about more subtle, day to day interpersonal excess with family, friends, and colleagues. So it's not as glaringly obvious as world changing excess can be.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I completely concur with that, and thank you for sharing those steps.
Yeah.
And we reach a part of our show now. We're going to highlight someone from our that we believe is exhibiting or has exhibited the fully human characteristics, whether they pass on to the present. I'll go first and say that person I have in mind is, and this is a person I may have said before, but I'm going to say it again, I should say, and that's a person that was like a stepfather to me. His name is Robert Frazier, and I grew up. He's my next door neighbor, and the father to at that time my best friends, because folks I've known my entire life. Don't even remember when I met him. And you can go back and say that about someone, but he was someone who I saw work hard every single day. He worked 2 jobs. He was passionate about his family and taking care of his family. He showed me more so than my own father what it meant to be a man who provides for his family. And he continued to be there as far as, now again, he had some imperfections just as anybody who's human. But what I admired the most about him was the fact that I saw growth in him. And later on, he was heavy and overweight when we were kids. Well, later on, he got very disciplined about his health, and he began to eat just really like once or twice a week. He walked literally every day. We just made jokes about sitting him downtown, even though we lived in downtown St. Louis, even though we lived in the suburbs of Missouri. I mean, a St. Louis suburb that was a good 7 to 10 miles from downtown, but he would just walk. And like I said, he worked literally every day. He got up and worked his part-time job, his full-time job. He was always there for his family. And to me, he was an example of an early example of what it took to be a man and be there as a provider for your family, as not only a disciplinarian, but as the love side of it as well. Even to the point today he died, he was always someone that was always there for me. If I needed to have a conversation with him, despite the fact he worked these hours and had his exercise routine, if I needed to talk to him, he was always there. So to me, he's someone who I hope to be as I get older and live this life I'm living now. So I want to lift him up as being an example of someone who's fully human.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm actually going to do a collective. So I mentioned that I was at this wedding on Friday, and the cousin whose daughter got married, he's one of seven kids who grew up really close to me in Yonkers. 2 of his siblings have already passed away. His oldest sister and his oldest brother as well are gone. But the 5 of them who were there, I'm just going to say their first names. Stephen, Michael, Tom, Johanna, and Barbara. Again, we just we grew up together. The Barbara and Johanna are a few years older than I am. Tom, Michael, and Steve are a few years younger than I am. But and they grew up with 9 people in the house and 1 bathroom. I just always remember that. And now in their 60s and 70s, they've been through cancer. They've been through a lot of challenges. 2 of them have lost their spouses. All of them have lost 2 of their siblings. They have kids and they have grandkids. And they've lived their lives doing everything from being, like a delivery truck driver to a plumber to a executive assistant to a career nurse just got up every day and lived their lives. And when we get together, we know we're old or older, but we can just kind of pick up who the kids were that we were, and they're they're this beautiful, perfectly imperfect family that I'm still fortunate to have, because as I said, my family of origin is gone. So I just want to mention my cousins as being my examples or exemplars for being fully human, today.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you again, Reggie, for bringing your energy, being your passion, and for writing a book, and for setting a topic for the show, and just being present every Monday for the show that you are. I appreciate that. Thank you, listening audience, for listening to this episode of Fully Human Connections podcast. We're every Monday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So until next Monday, we ask you and invite you all to consider joining us on the path to become more fully human. Engage with our podcast, and we look forward to interacting with you next Monday at 10 a.m. Take care, everyone. Take care, Reggie.
Bye-bye.